Welcome to the Neijiaquan Podcast. My name is Isaac Kamens. This is a bi-weekly podcast where my friend Jess O'Brien and I discuss internal martial arts, Qigong, and meditation. This week we continue our discussion on the founder of Ba Gua Zhang, Dong Hai Chuan. We look more at Dong's life in the palace, how he got there, how he went from being a servant to being the head trainer for the palace guard. Then we look a little more at the 36 songs and the 48 methods from Andrea Falk's book and Frank Allen's book, taking apart a couple of those, giving some insight into what those mean. And then on our Patreon this week, we continue our discussion of the Taoist 8 bodies, the 8 energy bodies in Taoism. We talk about the Qi body, which is the energy that runs your physical body. And it's an ongoing series, so check out the Patreon. There's also our series on the spiraling energy body, interviews, a bunch of other stuff. So check that out. Hope you enjoy the episode, and thanks for listening.
Welcome to the Neijiaquan Podcast with Isaac and Jess.
So Isaac, today we're back to our topic we've been working on about Master Dong Hai Chuan, the founder of Bagua, the originator of the martial art that we've been talking about so much lately. And there are quite a few different stories about him. Here's one from Wang Shujin's book, translated by Kent Howard in 2009. Having no place to stay in Beijing and very little money, Master Dong spent his days wandering about the Heaven's Bridge amusement district. In the evenings, he slept in the open near Heaven's altar where the emperor performed his annual rites on Lunar New Year. One day, the martial arts teacher of a Manchu prince came to Heaven's altar and happened to notice Master Dong. Despite his somewhat disheveled appearance, he observed that the young man had a rugged countenance and flashing eyes. After engaging him in conversation, the martial artist declared that he would politely like a match of skills. The two decided to use a straw mat as their ring. Whoever stepped off the mat would be the loser. After Dong won 3 successive matches, the other guy respectfully admitted defeat. However, he was so impressed with Master Dong that he subsequently found him a position as a servant in the palace, in hopes of him someday instructing the prince. So that's how Dong Hai Chuan was discovered, apparently. A quickie challenge match in the park, and he beat him three times straight.
Little Rochambeau.
Well, it sounds like some sort of pushing or shoving type of contest rather than like a ring fight.
Right, like I throw you off the mat or whatever.
Just clasp hands, maybe whoever throws the other guy off. So he got hired to go work in the palace just like that?
I guess maybe they were in the market for somebody.
The prince had no knowledge of Master Dong's skills. In fact, he himself was quite proficient in martial arts, practicing daily with great fervor, and had a very high opinion of his own skill. One day when the prince was working out, Master Dong made a small comment about his technique. When the prince heard this, he was quite surprised, and ordered Master Dong to demonstrate his own skill before the court. Master Dong's performance so amazed the prince that he realized at once that he was in the company of a true master. Without hesitation, the prince asked Dong to take him as a student. From that time forward, Master Dong's fame spread throughout the capital.
Right, and this is where the legend really picks up right now, because now you have the established, here he is in this period of time with an official position and all that stuff. So it's like the prequel is over, and now you're into the the main story.
Right, so now he's inside the palace. So the book goes on. Here's a good paragraph. Alas, as it is said, a tall tree catches too much wind, and fame attracts envy. Master Dong soon became a magnet for every boxer within 1,000 miles who wanted to test his skills against the prince's new teacher. But they all went away with their feathers plucked. Many of this braggadocios exited the palace with stolen treasures and antiquities, leaving behind messages daring Master Dong to come and get them. So Dong Hai Chuan traveled far and wide to retrieve the items in martial contests. Still, the challenges and thievery continued over the course of many years, and Master Dong found little rest. Finally, Dong himself was implicated in some sort of criminal activity and in punishment was castrated. From that time forward, the other servants in the palace referred to him as Old Eunuch instead of by his name.
So there's the
Whoa.
origins of the eunuch story.
So he's such a great fighter that everyone's challenging him all the time. And then he got busted for some sort of criminal activity.
Probably sleeping with somebody would be my guess.
Could be, or maybe embezzlement or something, because of all those treasures running around.
I mean, I'm sure there was a list of things that were punishable by,
Right.
eunuchery.
Right. I don't want to look too closely into that.
But yeah. I mean, it's also, there's, I don't know if you want to get into it now, but there's that other story about him posing as a spy or whatever, being a spy and posing as a eunuch. So
Right. So maybe he was claiming to be a eunuch.
That
one said he gets punished.
But maybe I'm saying maybe that was the crime, was that he got caught from being a spy or something, or was suspected of
right.
Some sort of treachery.
Right. I get the feeling that becoming a eunuch was the alternative to a death sentence. Maybe
Sounds like
either your head chopped off or
your dick, your other head.
Oh, so bad. So I guess some schools don't believe Master Dong was a eunuch. Some do. This one says that he was a great martial artist. Then he became a eunuch, which is interesting. He wasn't a eunuch from the start. It was later in his life as a punishment.
I think there's something about that, because if you're castrated young, you don't fully develop,
right.
And so that I think given his sort of fully developed body, that they assumed it was later in life.
And his reputation as a fighter, if you've got to be strong, right? So that's interesting. So anyways, there's a little bit more here to finish the story. As Master Dong grew older, he began to feel the art taught to him by his venerable teachers should be passed on to the next generation. He became acquainted with an eyeglass seller who often came to the palace to repair spectacles. His name was Cheng Tinghua. Master Dong was so impressed with Cheng's sincerity that he allowed him to become his first pupil from outside the palace gates. Right.
Well, this is where, again, the main sort of bulk of his teaching happened after the job in the palace. So, Yin Fu, a couple of those early students, were in the palace, and then also after, but, I think that Cheng was probably the first that had nothing to do with, being in a...
So that illustrates there's the first half of his life where he's teaching in the imperial court at the prince's palace, and then the second half, which is actually only a 10-year period after he leaves the palace, he teaches 72 disciples at that point. Right, so it happened real quick, and that's why people say Cheng Tinghua did a lot of the teaching, Yin Fu did a lot of the teaching, those guys maybe.
Makes sense.
When Master Dong passed away at age 90, his students erected a mausoleum in his memory outside the west gate of the capital. Each year, succeeding generations of his students still gather there to perform memorial rites in his honor. Although this grand master of a generation is gone, along with other great masters who followed in his steps, his art endures. However, the great social changes of our times have placed his great art in jeopardy of someday fading away from neglect. How sad. And that ends the introduction to Ba Gua by Lang Shujin.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing about him living to be 90, because that's much older than most other people say he lived. So
in his 60s, some say.
That
maybe that's just to prop him up and make him sound a little better.
Yeah, I mean, it also makes it so that he was much older when he was teaching, those later people versus, at the palace or whatever. Because if he was, I don't know what the timeline was, but, there may have been several years in between or whatever.
Right. It's interesting because different stories focus on his life in the palace and others focus on his life outside the palace.
Well, and it's not, he was also, right, they were saying he was kind of secretive about stuff, so maybe by not giving away his age, that kind of, lended itself to that sort of air of mysticism that he was.
So looking a little bit deeper into the story of Dong Hai Chuan, there's a number of different myths that seem to run through his story of him. The story of him as a eunuch. There's the story of him as an unbeatable fighter, but there's also the story of him as a waiter, which is apparently one of his. A lot of different traditions talk about his skill as a waiter. So I wanted to pull from Li Ying Arn's book, which is let's see. Ba Gua Zhang for Self-Defense by Li Ying Arn, 1972. One of the early Ba Gua books. It says, the great master of Ba Gua, Dong Hai Chuan, lived from 1796 to 1880. No one could relate the exact history of this mysterious man. He only came into prominence when he was a eunuch in the palace of the Qing emperor. Prior to that, he was relatively unknown. On one occasion, the emperor entertained his guests at a feast. The palatial grounds were crowded with people at that time, and and entrance and exit was a Herculean task. Dong Hai Chuan, however, could maneuver himself in and out of the palace grounds with comparative ease. The emperor was much surprised by Dong's ability and questioned him. It was then that Dong first revealed himself to be a master of Ba Gua Zhang. He was then obliged to give a full display of his skill. His performance was so unique and so impressed the emperor that he was at once made the pugilistic teacher of the palace guards. After this, Dong's fame spread far and wide. Dong only had a few students, as few could reach him in the closely guarded palace. It was only after his retirement, when he lived outside the palace, that he gained more followers. Among them were many great pugilists of great repute. So that's a little bit about that. This one says he got discovered as a waiter.
As a waiter, that's pretty... I mean, yeah, it's possible. I mean, who knows? Like, that's...
I mean, enough different stories include that it must have something to do with it.
I mean, it seems like quite a leap to go from, you can carry plates to now you can train my troops. But,
right, leader of the palace
it's... all right. But I mean, it does...
You have to admit, Bagua, that circle walking and spinning, I mean...
Right, and there's a lot of things about, like, the holding a plate in your hand and, doing stuff like the teacups and all that. So it's like, there might be some nugget of truth there.
I did some waiting in my time, and, especially as a busboy, you carry big old trays. Anyways.
I mean, yeah, I could see
it does keep coming up.
I could see the parallels, but just also, like I said, it's just that's quite a stretch. Like,
well, I mean, I was just thinking, like, a lot of martial arts styles come from farmers, right? Like, different weapons from the countryside, but this martial art does come from an urban city environment. The imperial city, the palace, like Bagua is designed for kind of an urban environment. It's not a martial art done out in the fields after work, right? Like, it's definitely an urban. It's a pretty specific combat style. I mean, like, it's not a general style. It's made for a specific time and place.
And if you're a servant or whatever, that does give you access, right? That explains how you get that close to someone who would be in a position of power, right?
So he's a servant on some level for sure, right? All right, so here's one. Many anecdotes were given of Dong's ability. One day, Dong was meditating in a sitting posture beside a wall. In the same room were his students. Suddenly, the wall collapsed, and the students were sitting at a distance were so frozen with fright that they could only gape and stare at the site of the accident. To their amazement, Dong was unharmed. For on looking around, they found him sitting quietly in a chair in another corner of the room.
Yeah, well, there you go.
Not exactly like a heroic fight story, but...
No, but I mean, that's another one of these things of, like, it's more than he was a good fighter. It was this miraculous abilities, kind of thing that are
untouchable.
Yeah, it's just kind of...
Another incident occurred on a cold winter day. Dong was asleep on a couch. I mean, he's passed out on the couch. Not a lot of martial arts stories begin like that.
Lazy ass, just sitting around, meditating, sleeping.
Right, he's either meditating or passed out. A student wanted to cover him with a blanket, but no sooner had he placed the blanket on the teacher when the latter suddenly disappeared. Looking around, the student was amazed to see the teacher sitting in another corner of the room.
So he got up and moved before the blanket could fall on him.
Right. Yeah, so there's something about his incredible speed there. I mean...
Well, all of that points to being very evasive, right? Which is a huge thing in Bagua. So again, it's just kind of telling stories of the master's abilities. I mean, I can think of one sort of modern one is somebody wrote a story about Ma Yue Liang, like avoiding a puddle. Right, like stepping over a puddle and like not getting, and that was like his, which is okay. Like that does take some balance and some skill, but it's not like something you're going to make.
It's not winning the UFC.
You're going to make a movie about the master who steps over a puddle, right?
There is a little bit of elegance in internal martial arts. They don't try to be like brutes, There's a little bit of, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, and it's like not having a ton of bricks fall on you is a good thing, I guess.
I mean, that's real life self-defense. All right, so at the end of this, it says here, it was learned from a reliable source that Dong in reality was formerly a notorious bandit and was wanted by the law. He then became a monk to go into hiding, but was later expelled from the monastery for intemperance. As a last resort, he ended up as a eunuch in the emperor's palace.
So he's getting wasted, or
I mean, so he's passed out. He's meditating. He's getting drunk in the monastery.
my kind of guy.
Yeah, I mean, it's starting to paint kind of a picture of a pretty cool dude. Last time we looked a little bit at the 36 and 48 traditional verses of Ba Gua Zhang that are said to come from Dong Hai Chuan, and I wanted to keep looking at some of these verses. But first out, there was a paragraph in Andrea Falk's book, A Shadow on Fallen Blossoms, from 2017. And this is a pretty cool paragraph that speaks to how these materials were used during the time Bagua was developing in the 20th century. She says that the norm was the passing of knowledge among friends is the norm in the world of Ba Gua Zhang. Two things strike one when looking at the history of Bagua in Beijing. One, everyone learned from everyone. You learn not only from your sifu, but from your martial brothers, uncles, cousins, and friends. There is no pure one-to-one lineage, no family style. Secondly, things were not written down. And so that's kind of the main idea being, there's not a lot of written material from that time, but it was common for everyone to like talk among each other and meet up. And that's been the theme, right? That we've been talking about so much.
That's exactly, tracks with Liu Hongjie's experience of, meeting people from both sides, the Yin Fu, the Chen Tinghua, and some other people. And, just that it was a sort of like an open source community, right? Like anybody could teach anybody, and there was just Dong Hai Chuan Bagua. And so, I think that these quotes or whatever are kind of from that era of, when it was just one school, and that like she said, everybody was talking to everybody. So, and it, it makes sense because there's different versions of these things, and,
songs and poems,
and a lot. It also makes sense in terms of why a lot of the training is very similar in the different Ba Gua Zhang schools. It's like you're still doing a lot of the same kind of walking circles and arm training.
And of the various books we've looked at, a lot of them share advice from lifting the top of the head and sitting in the waist. Like a lot of those must be from Master Dong, because everybody says
and the first. So the first 36 or whatever are primarily those are the more how-to part, and it seems like the later the other ones are the martial stuff. So clearly there was kind of a instructional, maybe not the right word, but like a guidebook, that maybe that he was creating, where it was like, all right, you already know this stuff, but here's a reference book so that you could, have something to go back to when you weren't training it, or you didn't have access to a teacher.
Exactly. So in Frank and Tina's book, The Whirling Circles of Ba Gua Zhang, they talk about the Ba Gua Zhang classics, the 36 songs and the 48 methods. So we've been talking about the methods a little bit, there's 48 of them, and they're little sort of pithy rhymed paragraphs that explain ideas and help you memorize stuff. The secret rhyme formulas for Bagua's fighting methods. So the second one is called observation method. Observe the opponents first. Stay back instead of advancing. Step back to know the situation. Small force can deflect much greater power. Pretty classic stuff. That's like... So when you observe the opponent first, then you stay back. So this one sort of seems like you should be observing the situation before you rush in. It seems like pretty
that's pretty
advice.
Good, pretty practical advice, right? Like, don't just be a dumbass and rush in, like see what's actually happening in front of you before you do something, right? That's fairly like practical.
And I think it speaks to that internal martial arts principle of don't think ahead to what could happen, rather observe exactly what's happening in the moment. Like,
for sure,
worrying about what this person could do is going to get in the way of reacting to when they actually throw the punch. So feints and stuff can have less of an effect if you're more aware, basically.
Right, and also if you're stepping back, quote unquote, you're giving yourself distance, time, space, and like, it's just easier for you to move out of the way if you're not charging into somebody, right? Like if you're doing, especially with like multiple people, right? The last thing you want to do is kind of charge one direction, because then they can all kind of converge on you. So this thing of having, a sense of like options, right? That you can see what's in front of you. You give yourself some space to act, and then you can do something.
And then it ends with small force can deflect much greater power, like Tai Chi.
Right. Well, that has to, I think, it's the same thing, right? That if you're waiting for the other guy to attack you and you move when he's coming at you, it takes a lot less force than if you try to stop something.
Right. Your own sheer power to block it, again, deflect.
And that's like the first real big thing you have to learn in Bagua is that you aren't standing still and doing something with your hands. You're always going to be moving your foot along with it, which is just a really different kind of feeling. So, that sense of kind of just moving as one piece. So that as you move back, it's not that you're like leaning back, or if you're moving forward, it's not that you're you're moving kind of like a spinning top, right? So the whole thing is moving around, but it's never going to sit in one place and do something.
Yet it's still a cohesive unit, but it's just on the move. And that deflective sense is a big Bagua thing of not going force on force, just ricocheting, deflecting, bounce off one thing to hit with the other, and go from high to low with the deflection kind of.
Otherwise known as change, right? I mean, it's like...
Rather than clash against their arm, you just fly off of it and swing around. All right, looking at the third one. This one is called stepping methods. Move the root before moving the fingertips. Fast hands are not faster than the half step. Use a half step for advancing and retreating. Control the opponent and calmly evade them. So that's the root. Again, the Bagua philosophy, move with the feet first.
Yeah, I mean, that's basically just repeating that same concept of just, it isn't going to be that your feet are still and you do something with your hands. It's going to be that your hand and foot move together. And
that half step gives you more speed than just shooting out your hand. Because that half step is when you're clashing with somebody, and that half step allows you to push into their space and sort of shove them off their position.
Yeah, and half step is just, I think, also saying like you're not, if you're standing on your right foot, your first thing is just going to be to stick your left foot out. It's not going to be to just dump yourself over into the other, to take a full step.
Like a balanced advance rather than a lunge. Yeah.
So it's like the half step could also be, because it could be the back foot coming in like a shingy technique, but it can also be the front foot going out, right? So I think, it's just this idea that you're splitting your step into parts, right? That it isn't just, they come at you and you charge forward. It's that there's some controlled aspect to your stepping.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I get the impression of somebody just taking, like, teacher keeps saying this slogan again and again.
Right.
Like, fast hands are not faster than half step. I can see him pointing to a student and yelling that. Like, it just became one of the things. So he wrote it down, and now we have it.
Well, and it also has to do with, if somebody's throwing a punch at you, if you do something with your hand, you didn't get, they could, if they break through your hand, you're in trouble. If you move your whole body, they're just going to miss you entirely. So, it's just that piece about avoidance.
And you've got power behind what you do when you use it. Rather than flicking your hand out to try and deflect, you use a half step to a more substantial...
But one of the key principles that in all internal martial arts has to do with not letting the other person's force land on you, right? Whether you do it by changing angles like Xingyi does, or you do it by absorbing the force and dispersing it like Tai Chi does, or Bagua just does it by kind of moving and the force doesn't land. It's like, again, it's the
deflecting,
it's that spinning top idea, right? That, they might make contact with you, but the force isn't going to land on you. It's going to spin off. And so this idea of, if you do it correctly.
Right.
But that's true of anything. Any technique, if you do it wrong, it doesn't work.
Right? Yeah, no, that's the theory is that you keep that rotation going. So it deflects stuff.
My experience has been that it works. That you're if you can manage to keep your body moving, you're just in a better position than especially if you're fighting more than one person. You're in a much better position than if you do something, stop, do something, stop, do something,
just slug
stop.
it out standing there.
Because every time you stop, you're making yourself vulnerable to, an attack from a different angle,
Sure.
right? Where if you're moving, it's like, it's hard to hit a moving target, right?
Yep. And Bagua takes that to kind of a ridiculous level of just always moving, basically. That's just the first thing you do. Well, speaking of that, the next one is called walking method. Skills come from circle walking. Hands change when steps change. Block high, brush low, elbow strike. Push, lift, carry, and roll to follow one's bend. So again, skills come from circle walking. So like, there you go. Like, feels like we were just saying that. Then hands change when steps change. So there is, all of these have some obsession with the feet and the hands being connected.
Well, that's Bagua's unique thing, really, is that most martial arts don't do that. Most martial arts, again, you stop. Even Tai Chi and Ching, your feet stop. You do something, with your hands. It's connected to your feet,
sure,
but your feet aren't actually moving while you're doing the technique. That's the thing about Bagua that's sort of weird and special, is that very few things are done where you're planted, right? It's all done as you're moving, and that, I think that's just a weird jump for people to make. So that's probably why there's so many references to it initially, because it's like, this is the thing you're going to be struggling with the most in the beginning.
Right. And again, each of them's like a slogan. Like, I could just see Master Dong, skills come from circle walking. Just a general admission to everyone in earshot. You just shout the command. And
the main thing is the circle walking, and all the techniques come out of that, right?
Walking.
So, your palm strike comes out of your step. Your turnaround comes out of your kobu, right?
And this, at the end here, he says push, lift, carry, and roll. That's this Tui Tuo Dai Ling. And
to me, that's kind of like their version of Peng Lu Ji and An.
could
Right?
be
It's like giving you the
push and pull. And
your basic building blocks for all your techniques are going to be some piece of these four type of
forward, up, down, back, kind of.
Yeah, I mean, usually it's some sort of directional thing, right? Because up, forward, most things you're going to do initially in Bagua are going to, sort of involve that up and out kind of feeling of like the single palm change. So, it's just kind of reinforcing that idea of, expand while you do stuff, don't contract, right?
That's very Bagua. So, okay, here's the cascade step method. Linking step takes longer than a simple step. All techniques have to be simple, natural, and efficient. Turn the body and make the attacker fall into emptiness. Taking the opportunity is a real Jiang Hu skill. And Frank Cantina here explained that Jiang Hu just means highly skilled expertise. So you can be a real expert. Turn the body and make the attacker fall into emptiness. That's another internal martial arts slogan. When you make contact, if you turn, you can cast them aside kind of easily, basically.
Well, going into emptiness, that's a specific thing. That's the feeling of, like I was saying before, where you go to put pressure on something and it's not there.
You think you got them,
and so you fall, because if you think the wall is going to be there and you go to push it as hard as you can, and all of a sudden it turns out to be paper thin, you're just going to fall right through. You're going to fall right on your face, right? So this is kind of that, again, just sort of that thing of like, don't let their force land on you.
Yep, and the Tai Chi talks about that a lot too. Yeah, it's interesting. These are pretty across the board. And the Tai Chi classics are pretty across the board too, now that I think about it. They kind of apply to everybody in Chinese martial arts, especially internal martial arts.
Well, if you remember, which you probably don't, but the last story we told in the one of the stories we told in the Magui episode was about him fighting some Tai Chi guy, and how that was one of the few instances where this actually happened, because for the most part, Tai Chi guys and Bagua guys got along because they realized they're basically doing the same shit.
Pretty simple, similar.
They all kind of consider it to be one family, hence the Neijiaquan, right?
Well, speaking of the connection between Tai Chi and Bagua, prohibiting double-weighted step method. So it's like, damn, that's straight out of Tai Chi.
Well, that's also where I I suspect the guy who wrote this stuff down was...
He might have read some Tai Chi books.
Right, and he was trying to use language that was familiar to people who did internal martial arts, because it just...
These were the terms people were using.
Yeah, right? So, it gives it their own little spin. But
I can imagine among everyone discussing what double weightedness back then, and then today the same debate continues.
Well, double weightedness is one of those concepts that has probably 10 different meanings. So
right, everyone's got their own idea.
You can have a completely different idea about what it means than someone else, and you're both right, because it's it's just a term, but terms get attached to lots of different techniques.
Everyone's context. Well, here, this one's specific to Bagua. It's interesting. Never stop walking with the feet together. The back foot takes most of the body weight. Standing on both feet in one line is double weighted. Mm-hmm. So to him, you're standing with your feet one in front of the other on a line. That's different than the Tai Chi side-to-side double weightedness. This one's on a straight line double weightedness.
But Tai Chi has that too. Tai Chi has that. Right. That's another one. Again, that's another one of those things. So yeah.
But this one is specific to Bagua, which is pretty cool.
It's a different, slightly different.
So it's just it's one side,
Because again, double weighted isn't, as I understand it, which I think I do, isn't related to a technique. It's related to a feeling inside your body, right? That you can be, you can have your weight 50-50 and not be double weighted. You can also have your weight 100-0 and be completely double weighted. So it isn't, from one definition again, because it can also have to do with top and bottom. It can have to do with how you're responding, like pushing against something with your hand that's being double weighted. Right, resisting force with force is double weightedness, because you now create it's essentially your foot and your hand instead of your 2 feet, but it still you have pressure in 2 places, not in one, essentially, right? So the pressure isn't going into your foot; it's going into your hand and your foot, thus being double weighted, right? So it's kind of like again, it's just like it's about a feeling inside of your body that you're stuck, essentially. And that can happen.
You wind up getting stuck.
That can happen in any position. Like over twisting, for example. You twist your upper body in one direction too much and your lower body in the other direction too much. That's another form of being double weighted.
So basically unbalanced could be...
Yeah, I mean, that's basically what
And in Bagua, when you are walking the circle and you end up walking a tightrope like that, that's one of the prohibitions, right? You're not supposed to walk like on wobbly balance like that. You're supposed to have a little space in between and cut the feet in a certain way.
Absolutely.
So it's cool that they called that out. So I just imagine everyone in the 1890s is discussing double weightedness, and this is the Bagua version.
Well, and that's also one of the really common mistakes people make in Bagua is they try to walk really narrow, and it's not, that's just not how it's done.
Got to have a little space in there.
Yeah.
All right, that's it for today.
All right. Hey, folks, thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed the episode. Again, just a reminder, like and subscribe, tell a friend, check out the Instagram for images to go along with the episodes. We have a Facebook if you're into that stuff. Also, on our YouTube page, there are some clips from our Patreon episodes, so you can get a sample of what we do in the Patreon episodes. All right, thanks for listening. Thanks for your support, and take care of yourself.